As I've mentioned many times, that's a little bit feedbacky. A little feedbacky. Do you want me to keep talking? Keep talking? Keep talking. And so we do have a slide for this when Charlene can, she's multitasking back there. So the Black History Month, we're on Black History Month. So I want to talk about, and so one of the reasons why Black History Month is so important, which I've talked to you about before, is how it changes our mental equivalent. Because if the only pictures we see of certain people are in negative light, or if we don't know the history because that part of our history has been repressed, then we never can expand and really celebrate and acknowledge the contributions of all the diversity in our country. And so this lady, does anybody know who Pauli Murray was? I'm familiar with her. So I just learned about her. There's actually, I think, going to be a movie about her soon. So that'll be great. But she's quite an interesting lady. She was a law student at Howard University in the 1940s. 1944. She was the only woman in not just in her class, but in the whole school, and not just students, but teachers. She was the only woman at Harvard, in 1944, and she, in her final, she was in class with her students and her teachers, and they were trying to figure out what they could do to reverse segregation that time. There was a Plessy versus Ferguson, which created the equal but separation clause. And so equal but separation became this big, constitutional thing. And so she mentioned that she thought it should be based on the 13th and 14th Amendments, and instead of the equality part, it should be focused on the separation part. That was actually what was unconstitutional, was the separation. Well, her classmates and her professors kind of laughed at her. And she said, I'm so sure that that's going to happen. Within 25 years, that is going to be reversed. And I'm going to bet, she bet her professor $10 that within 25 years, that Plessy would be reversed. Well, it was just 10 years later that her professor, his name was Spotswood Robinson. Spotswood Robinson. Her professor in the 1950s began working with Thurgood Marshall on Brown versus the Board of Education. And he remembered about her final paper. She had written her final paper on this. And he went back and had it in his files. And he presented it to Thurgood Marshall and the rest of the lawyers, and that became the basis of winning Brown versus the Board of Education, which, as you know, if you know your history, is what abolished segregation in schools. And so she actually didn't learn about this until many years later, actually. But there's an article in the New Yorker about this where she said, by the time Murray learned about her contribution to the successful argument of Brown versus the Board of Education, she was nearing 50, 2/3 the way through a life of remarkable for its range as for its influence. She was a poet, a writer, an activist, a labor organizer, a legal theorist, and the first African-American woman Episcopal priest. She decided later on she was going to become an Episcopal priest. She was friends with Langston Hughes. She joined James Baldwin at the McDowell Colony, the first year it admitted African Americans. She maintained a 23-year friendship with Eleanor Roosevelt. They wrote letters and had many meetings. She helped Betty Friedan found the National Organization for Women. Along the way, she articulated the intellectual foundations of two of the most important social justice movements of the 20th century. First, when she made her argument for overturning segregation, and later when she co-wrote a law review article subsequently used by a rising star at the ACLU, one Ruth Bader Ginsburg, to convince the Supreme Court that the Equal Protection Clause applies to women. Yeah, it's nice, right? And additionally, she was arrested for sitting at the front of the bus 2 decades before Rosa Parks. 2 decades in Richmond, Virginia. And at that time, the ACLU and the NAACP decided not to use that case for the ultimate situation that they were able to use with Rosa Parks. But so I love hearing these histories, and I love my job because I get to explore these ideas, and they get to take me down little roads. And so as I was learning about Pauli Murray, it made me start thinking about the amendments, about the 13th, the 14th, and 15th Amendments. And you know that those are called the Reconstruction Amendments. I'm going to give you guys a little history here. Those are the because history is really important. You know, I mean, it's this time in where we are right now in our history, it's important to know where we came from and how that can inform where we go. And what I know from our history is it gives me hope because we think we're in challenging times. Yeah, try living in 1865. You know, and sometimes if you haven't been a good history student or you maybe forgot your history, sometimes I think it goes, there was a civil war, it ended in 1865, everybody was freed, yay, it's all good, you know? But, and then it just happened, right? That the southern states said, oh darn, and they said, we're gonna comply with this new idea of everybody, freed people in our country. And of course, it didn't happen that way. It was a huge struggle, You know, Abraham Lincoln was assassinated a couple of weeks after he signed the 13th Amendment. The 13th Amendment was the first of the Reconstruction Amendments that freed human beings from enslavement, that it made it illegal. He signed it, he had assassinated. Guess who took his place? Andrew Johnson, who was not a big supporter of the 13th Amendment, and the reason why Abraham Lincoln picked him was because he was a states' rights advocate, and he thought that would help bring the southern states, this was an election, right? At the end of the Civil War. And he thought, if I have somebody, I'm going to balance, I'm going to bring everybody in, unite everybody. Yeah, yeah. Not knowing that, a mere month or so later, after the inauguration, he would not be around. So Andrew Johnson takes the place, and Andrew Johnson is, again, not this big advocate for civil rights. But there were a lot of people in Congress who were. and so I was looking at this 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment was about equal protection under the law. It's what gave us, if you're born in the United States, you're a citizen, because at that time, there was no law that protected people that made them citizens. If they, so the African Americans that were freed weren't considered citizens. And so this gave anybody that was born on this soil citizenship, and it gave them equal rights, not only out in the world in business, but in government, and just in all kinds of ways. So I want to share with you how the 14th Amendment got ratified. And it's going to just take me a couple minutes, but I'm going to share with you this timeline. It's from Wikipedia, but it's insightful. So it starts actually in 1857 when a slave named Dred Scott, do you remember that from your history books? Dred Scott sued for his freedom, and the United States Supreme Court ruled that neither Scott nor any other African American was legally a U.S. citizen. So Scott lost the case because as a non-citizen, he didn't have any legal rights. So in 1865, with the Civil War over and the nation faced with integrating former slaves into society, the Joint Committee on Reconstruction is formed. The 15-man committee would write the 14th Amendment. So that was in December of 1865. In December of 1865, after a bitter fight, the 13th Amendment is formally adopted. 13th Amendment, again, is the one that freed the African Americans. Is formally adopted, the first of the Reconstruction Amendments, which made slavery illegal in the United States. So in April 1865, Andrew Johnson is now president. He vetoed the Civil Rights Act of 1865, which gives citizens' rights to anybody born in the U.S. However, civil rights activists, even though he vetoed it, they still passed it in Congress. But civil rights activists at that time were concerned that act wasn't permanent, and so they chose to fight for a constitutional amendment. So in June 1866, the 14th Amendment passed through Congress. But it still must be ratified. We know this about our amendments, right? That even though the Congress passes it, then states have to ratify it. 2/3 of the states have to ratify it. And note that Virginia just ratified the Equal Rights Amendment after how many years? Many, many years. So the states have to start ratifying. So in June 1866, Connecticut was the first state to ratify the 14th Amendment, and then New Hampshire was the next. In July of 1866, Tennessee ratifies the amendment, becoming the first southern state to do so. But the remaining southern states refused to ratify this amendment. And in 1867, Delaware fails to ratify the 14th Amendment, becoming the first state outside of the former Confederate states to reject it. So Delaware would eventually ratify the amendment in 1901. 1901, Delaware finally ratified the amendment. So in March of 1867, our creative congressmen at the time, they were all men, they decided that they would divide the southern states into 5 military zones, and former Confederate states are required to ratify the amendment to be allowed back into the Union. Now, you don't think that was a little cantankerous, right? That they said, you have to ratify it, if you want to come back to the Union. So in July 1868, Louisiana and South Carolina ratified the 14th Amendment, and this gives the amendments the necessary 3/4 of the states to ratify. In July 1868, Secretary of State William Seward announces that the 14th Amendment has been ratified and is now part of the Constitution. It would be over a century before all states ratified the amendment. In 1898, in 1898, when Wong Kim Ark is denied re-entry into the United States, he successfully sues in 1898 on the basis of his constitutional rights were violated, because he was born in San Francisco to Chinese immigrants and based his defense on the 14th Amendment. And so you can see how our amendments are so powerful and beautiful because we create them for a certain thing, but then the law works out, and then it expands, and it becomes, this is for everybody. It's not, I have been protected by the 14th Amendment around equal process and due rights. And so, and then in 1954 is when the Brown versus Board of Education was struck, the segregation was struck unconstitutional. And in 1976, 110 years after the 14th Amendment is proposed to Congress, Kentucky finally ratifies it. 1976, guys. 1976. And in 2003, September of 2003, Ohio finally ratifies the 14th Amendment. That's amazing history, right? That this struggle and this challenge and how we work forward and how we go forward, that this democracy is messy, and it takes a while. And the challenge for us, I think, even this day and age, is that we have to go forward. That there are people like Pauli Murray, and there's people that are standing up, that did this last week and stood up for our Constitution. And so, as we celebrate this wonderful diversity and how this happened, we can take this into the future and how we go about. And I want to just add to you, the 15th Amendment, that was the third one, gave African American men the right to vote in 1870. Women, in general, wouldn't get the vote for another 50 years. Women did not get the vote for 50 years after all men got the vote in our country. So 1920, we're celebrating 100 years. So all you women, all us women, along with everybody, it's the celebration of this amazing history that we have, and how we can go forward to know that it is messy and it takes a while, but we can band together and we can make a difference in our world. And so God bless those who work to get the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments passed, just like all the other amendments, and how our Constitution is so sturdy. So you might wonder what all this has to do with our topic, which is our bodies are not an apology. And so, besides being relevant to Black History Month, what's this topic have to do with? What did all that challenge have to do with? It had to do with how bodies look. A lot of our challenges are because we have judgments around physical appearance, literally physical appearance, whether it's a African American, or it's a woman, or it's somebody who doesn't show up correctly in whatever physical form we think that beauty comes in or health comes in, and so a lot of these fights are about moving past the judgment of how we judge physical appearance. And so the book that we're reading for this series is called The Body is Not an Apology. Sonia Renee Taylor talks about how she came up with this title, The Body is Not an Apology. And she tells that she was talking to a young woman who had cerebral palsy. And this young woman had gotten herself in a situation where she didn't protect her body from another person. She didn't really take care of herself. And so Sonia was like, well, why didn't you take care of yourself? Why did you allow yourself to get in this situation? And she said, well, my cerebral palsy makes it so hard and inconvenient. And I just didn't feel like I could speak up for myself. I just couldn't feel like I could do that because it's so inconvenient to other people. And Sonia Renee Taylor she said that just brought up all the times she remembered that she'd apologized for having the wrong kind of body, for having a body that didn't fit the social norms, who didn't have the right color body. And she said, your body is not an apology. Your body is not something you should have to apologize for. It is a vessel that holds our divine expression of who we are. And it's not an apology. And so she goes on and talks about how important it is that we have these bodies in the world and that we can all agree on that. She says we struggle to find agreement on much of anything over the centuries. Just think about how long we argued about gravity and whether the world is the shape of a pizza. Like, we've argued about that for a long time. But here is a completely non-controversial statement, I think. We have consensus around, you, my dear, have a body. And should you desire to remain on this spinning rock hurling through space, you will need a body to do it. Everything else we think we know is up for debate. But that's something, even in this polarized world we live in, we can all agree that we have this body and that we need this body in order to experience and to express and to survive on this earth. Has anybody seen the TED Talk by Jill Bolte Taylor? She's the one that wrote the book on my stroke of insight. She's a neuroscientist who had a stroke. And while she was having the stroke, she was knowing what was going on in her brain as she was having it. And she has this great TED Talk about how she's having this, and she's like, oh, right now, this part of my brain is shutting off. And the part of the brain that shut off was the part that gave her boundaries, that separated her from other things. And it was a real problem because all of a sudden she was one with the phone, and she couldn't dial 911 because it was all one. And she said, the realization of that, how necessary it is for us to have that definition of who we are, to even to survive and live in the world. And when we talk about oneness, we talk about non-duality and knowing that we're a divine expression of God, and yet we must, in order to have these individualized expression of that God presence, we have to have these physical forms in order to do that. Dr. Holmes says it this way. He says, body expresses intelligence. It's apparent intelligence being lent by the consciousness which permeates it. The physical body is evolved for the purpose of allowing consciousness to function on this plane. The physical body has evolved to allow this consciousness, this divine consciousness, to enjoy and to live and to experience and be part of this plane. And that's a really sacred thing. That's a beautiful thing for us to be able to love these physical bodies that give our consciousness, our divine expression, an avenue, a way to express. And what I love about, to see how our own way we talk about this philosophy over the last 30 years or so has been really special for me. And when I started really delving into this over 30 years ago, it was all about the mind, right? It was all about the science of mind. And it was all about here up is all that's important, really. And what you think, and how you think, and what your beliefs are, and that is it. And then about 20 years ago or so, it started where people were like, yeah, this is important, but I have a heart. If I'm always just thinking, I'm not including the wise. We have a brain in our heart as well. There's a wisdom within our heart that's intuitive and can give us information. And that if I combine those two, the emotions and the wisdom of the heart with the incredible thoughts and beliefs, that's what's really powerful. That's powerful. And when we deny those emotions, that's not good, right? And now what is happening is that we're realizing that our bodies don't end at the head or the heart, that we have this full expression, and that there's actually wisdom in our gut, that we have a wisdom that guides us and directs us, and we don't listen. We don't listen to the wisdom of our bodies. And so that's where we are now. This is what's happening. This is what's happening with the Me Too movement. This is what's happening with Black Lives Matters. This is what's happening with the positive body images. This is what's happening in the LGBTQ community and their own expression. It's bringing the physical body and the acceptance of and the love of and the using that wisdom that is within our physical bodies. It's a very powerful time for us. It's a very powerful time for us to begin to incorporate that even more. How do we incorporate our physical presence, our heart essence, our mental, expression in order to be powerful creators in this vessel that we have that houses that divine? Because that's a part of it too. We have the spiritual, the mental, the emotional, and the physical. And when we bring all those together, that's when we really shine. The subtitle of Songya's book is, it's called The Body is Not the Apology, and the subtitle is The Power of Radical Self-Love. The Power of Radical Self-Love. And she says, concepts like self-acceptance and body neutrality are not without value. When you have spent your entire life at war with your body, these models offer a truce. But you can have more than a ceasefire. You can have radical self-love because you are already radical self-love. And that's what we talk about here, right? That radical self-love of the divine that expressing in and through us. And we talk about how is it that we lose that? How do we forget that? We know that, children don't arrive here hating their bodies. They don't arrive here hating anybody else. It's all happy. Songya says, children don't arrive here ashamed of their race, their gender, their age, their disability. Babies love their bodies. Every discovery they encounter is freaking awesome. Have you ever seen an infant realize they have feet? Have you ever seen... It's like, I remember my son, they'd be like, la, 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 oh, wow, that's amazing, we lose that, right? We get, it's just like, it's just common. But when we think about the amazement of these bodies and how they show up and how they support us, that's freaking awesome, right? But we hear these stories and we let these stories go into our experience of, we come to a place where we're told, for some reason, our bodies are not the way they're supposed to be, or the way we use our bodies isn't the way it is supposed to be. And in our teaching, when I teach my practitioner students, some of the things it is, when someone comes to them and they've got this issue and there's going on, we say, well, has this ever happened to you before? Where did this wound start? Like, where in your life did you have this belief system begin to talk to you? And many of us can go back and say, when did I start being shamed about my physical body? When was I shamed about how I used my physical body? I remember when I was thinking about this, I remember when I was a little girl, my grandmother was sitting in the living room, and I went in, and I was going to put on a performance for her, and I decided to dance for her. And I was dancing like this beautiful ballerina. I mean, I just thought I was really hitting it all, And I had this thought of her just thinking, oh. And all of a sudden, my grandmother says, all this movement, oh my gosh, you're so full of energy. Could you just go outside? And I was like, oh, okay. maybe I shouldn't move my body so much. I mean, that's the story. So it doesn't mean that we had people in our lives that directly told us that, something was wrong with us. That can happen. But all these subtle things, the teacher's telling us, sit down, be quiet, being picked at recess for the sports, being, the teasing that we get growing up, or not fitting in, not being like. These are the stories. And so we apologize for our physical appearance all the time. I was thinking, so this morning I'm thinking, well, when was the last time I apologized for my body? And you know what I realized? Yesterday. Yesterday. And you know who can prove it? Is Tamara. Yes. Yes. Tamara came over to my house to pick up the hospitality supplies and a couple other things. And I opened the door. I'd been working in the basement all day. We're doing all this stuff. I hadn't even looked at myself. And I said, oh, I must be a mess. I haven't even looked. I apologized. But Tamara, being an excellent student and somebody who practices what I preach, said to me, you are beautiful just the way you are. You're always beautiful just the way you are. Yay, Tamara. I'm like, yay. But it didn't even occur to me. It didn't even occur to me till this morning when I was thinking back. So you think back. When was the last time you apologized for your physical appearance, for how you used your body, for, because we do it all the time. Oh, I'm sorry. I have a friend who has really, serious food allergies. Every time we go to a restaurant, she says, I'm sorry. I'm going to be your high maintenance, customer today, and we say that all the time. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, did I? Oh, and instead of being able to take up the space that we are and to be who we are and to be okay with whatever our needs are, because we do that to ourselves. We don't listen. How many of us wait for a while before they get a drink of water? They know that they have to have a drink of water, or to go to the restroom. How often have you just pushed that out a little bit longer and not listened to your body, or pushed it? I had an experience this week where I was starting to feel a little under the weather, and I had an appointment with Karen, and I called her and I said, you know what, I just need to rest. Or we texted, and because I was like, I need to take care of this body. Need to take care of it, but we ignore it. We don't think about it. And so that's your homework this week, right? Is to really think about when do you apologize for your body, for who you are, for your physical appearance, for having physical needs. And when can you listen to yourself? Listen to the body. Because what's so powerful and what we teach is that divine energy, that intelligence of who we are, is naturally coming forward, expressing who we're meant to be. We don't have to apologize for anything. Sonia Renee Taylor quotes Marianne Williamson in her book. She was talking about relationships, and in it she describes the principle of natural intelligence. She said, an acorn does not have to say, I intend to become an oak tree. I intend to become an oak tree. Natural intelligence intends that every living thing become the highest form of itself and designs us accordingly. Designs us accordingly. Whoever we are supposed to be, we have been designed that way, that we don't have to intend it any more than an acorn does. We love who we are, how we showed up, who it is that we're expressing in the world. And when we do that, when we really love ourselves, we are kinder to ourselves. We take better care of ourselves, and we love others. This is Sonia Renee says, it is through our own self-transformed relationships with our bodies that we become champions for other bodies on our planet. And this comes back around, right, to this whole Black history, civil rights, is that when we widen our circle, when we see others, when we love ourselves enough to look up and see others. Now, I agree with this, that when we love ourselves, we're more generous, but I also know it works the other way. There's been many times when I've opened myself up to be generous to others I may be having a challenge with or may not agree with or and I get to know them, and then I think, wow, if I can be that kind and generous to somebody out there, maybe I can be that kind and generous to myself. Sometimes I treat myself less than I would others. So it's a two-way street. We can't lose. We can't lose. Take care of ourselves, love ourselves. We're going to be a greater expression of that love out in the world. Love others, accept others. We're going to be a greater, compassionate expression of ourselves. There's a poem by Nariya Waheed, and there's this line in it. It says, "And I said to my body softly, I want to be your friend. It took a long breath and replied, I have been waiting my whole life for this." Let's take this idea into our spiritual practice today. I'd like to close your eyes. Just take a nice deep breath in. So let us just be in this silent place together for a moment as we breathe in and allow that breath to just settle into the heart space. And just for this moment, just really feel into your body temple. You might just notice, is there some place that is feeling any tension or discomfort? And just notice that and be okay. Be okay. You might also notice where your body feels great. What's going on that's good in your body? And you might choose to, within that heart space, just say to your body, I want to be your friend. I want to be your friend. And just listen for the moment how your body might respond. And what is it that you can do this week to prove that friendship with your body? What ways can you love it and honor it? Cherish it. Listen to it. And as you deepen into this awareness of this unconditional love for your physical body, just allow it to move through your body and spill out into this room. Because again, when we love ourselves, it spills out, widens our circle. And so just allow that love and appreciation for the people that you're sitting next to in front and behind you, and the beautiful diversity and variety of how we all show up. And can't you agree that every single person sitting in this room, and I know who might be watching us online, is beautiful just the way we are? Let that gratitude and love spill out from this room and these personal relationships that we might have here, and just expand that into, imagine into the rest of your day. And just make a note that when you see a person, just take a moment to really look at them, to acknowledge them, to see their physical presence, and to find some essence about them that you can appreciate and love. And there may be even something that you can share with them, some appreciation for their smile or just some aspect of who they are showing up as physically in this moment. And let's expand this awareness throughout this week and beyond into our world, and notice others loving and appreciating each other. Notice how that happens in the news or in the shows that you might watch or the blogs that you read. Where are people acknowledging the beauty of our physical presence, acknowledging the diversity and the uniqueness and the perfect ways that we show up? Allow those experiences to come to you this week. Open yourself up to see and celebrate the diversity and the many ways that we show up in physical form, and give thanks for this unique way that spirit shows up in us and how important it is that we have these unique expressions. And let us just, as we always do, surround our world with this love, this unconditional love. Find a place on this globe where this unconditional love is needed, especially for the physical bodies. And we think about those in China and beyond who've been affected by a virus. And I especially lift up the doctor who this week lost his life because he was a brave person who spoke out about this virus many months ago. And he put himself in this place to help and lift up others, and we just celebrate him and his life. And others at this very moment who are putting their own physical bodies on the line for the highest and best for their world, for their communities, for others. Let us know that we each find a way to be of support, to lift up and love and make a difference in this world. As we come back into this room, breathe right back into this room. Place your hand over your heart and just acknowledge your physical body one more time. Love it up. It's freaking awesome. So it's with a grateful heart that I just know that we each find a renewed way of celebrating and living in these physical bodies, that we find new and joyful ways to love ourselves and to love others in these physical forms. This is what I'm so grateful for today. I'm so grateful to speak this word, to know this truth, to release it into that law, knowing that it is already done. And so it is. So we let it be. And Patty and Brent are going to sing for us again.